Good morning, everyone. I'm Carlos Teixeira, and I'm going to be the host of this event today. I'm Associate Professor at the Institute of Design, and I'm also the instructor of the course where we're going to be presenting this final work from the Sustainable Solutions workshop. So welcome, everyone. And we're still having a lot of people joining our event here today. And let me first go over some of the how we're going to proceed, and then we can start with our presentations. So this is going to be we're going to first have a presentation of the work developed by the students. This is going to take about 15, maximum 20 minutes. And after we finish the presentation, we're going to have a panel discussion. We have 3 panelists that will be joining us for the discussion. I will be doing introductions to them when we finish the presentation. And then after that, we are going to open up for question and answers with the attendees. So we're going to have opportunity to engage with the panelists and also check the question and answers. So check the questions that will be posted in the chat, and we can have those questions to be asked with the panelists, as well as open discussion with the students in the course at the end of the time. So we're going to go for a total of 90 minutes. So we're going to start at 9 o'clock. This is Chicago time, so Central Time in the United States. And we're going to go up to 10:30, and that's the time that we plan to finish. So let me, first of all, do an introduction about the course and an introduction of what you should expect to see here in terms of our final presentation. So this is the Sustainable Solution workshop. This is one of the many workshops that we have at the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech. The workshop is a 14 weeks project. It's a project base, and it's also teamwork. So a group of 12 students worked for 14 weeks on a challenge, on a topic, and they explored several design concepts as part of that process. The focus of the project here, in this case, is about the energy sector. And every year when I run this course, we give the students a contemporary challenge that happens at the intersection of social, environmental, and economic systems. So the focus is on large-scale transformation by reimagining the infrastructure that is necessary for this kind of transformation. So if I would summarize what we do in this workshop, we prototype infrastructures for large-scale transformations. That's in a nutshell what we intend to do here. The students are going to present more details about the work and the process that they follow, as well as do a complete presentation about the concepts that they worked on. So the major challenge that they worked on this year was on this concept of the microgrid as a civic infrastructure. So I'm going to let now the students start the presentation. And as I said, I suggest that everybody can post comments and questions in the chat. I will be following the chat, and there is also the entire group of students that will be following the chat, and I can also move them into the panelists and engage in conversations, as well as the panelists will be also engaging in that. If you look at the chat, you're also going to be able to download the report So I suggest Azra, that is the TA for this course, will be posting the link for the final report. So if you want to download the final report as you're watching the presentation, you're free to do that. And you can see a lot of more details about what is being presented here in the report. So we're gonna manage the chat. We're gonna you can download the report, and we're gonna have here the live presentation. So with all that, I'm gonna pass now to Zach, Mirali, and Veronica, who will be leading the presentation. And then we'll come back to introduce the panelists for a discussion. So Zach, now it's your turn. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carlos. And before I get things kicked off here, I just wanted to express my gratitude for simply just being here this morning. I'm really looking forward to the conversations that will ensue. As many of us know, we're perhaps always at these inflection points, and we make all of these choices every single day. And it's in forums like this where we get to talk about those decisions, and we get to imagine together. And I would also like to acknowledge, while Renali, Veronica, and I have helped put this presentation together, wanted to acknowledge everyone else that was in the class. You'll see a little bit more about how we work together, but this was ultimately a team, truly a team effort with a lot of cross-pollination. So we hope we do the team justice by presenting everything that we've been through together, but we certainly welcome you to view the report when you are able to do more of a deep dive into the findings and more of the collective effort and work of the class. So kicking things off here, we all know electricity is essential in the 21st century. It's an asset that we are all intimately familiar with, but we don't really think twice about until it's not there. So this is usually where our relationship with energy ends, which is the utility of it in our everyday lives. What lies behind the outlet is the grid: power plants, wires, batteries, utility poles, and transformers that are organized and orchestrated to keep America running. It's a system that has slowly evolved over the last 150 years, yet modern life continues to place new demands on it. And in pushing it beyond its limit, we're starting to take notice of how it's holding us back. Increased blackouts across the nation, continued reliance on non-renewable resources polluting the environment, cybersecurity threats, and increased centralization and influence of the industry as a whole. We're in need to rethink how we generate and deliver energy, how it can withstand disruption, and most sharply, how it can serve and how it will impact and strengthen our communities. For as ingrained and pervasive as the grid is, it has immense potential to influence, shape, and transform the ways our lives are organized. This is an enormous task and tremendous responsibility, and one we simply do not have the luxury to avoid. We're riding a massive wave of momentum to radical transformation, whether we're ready or not, and it's time to make choices now. But in order for choices to be made, they must be defined. What choices do we have? Applying a design approach to the existing work done on the microgrid at IIT and Bronzeville, we have begun to illustrate future opportunity areas and the choices within them. It is our hope that in illustrating and envisioning these choices, both in this presentation and the report, that we're able to empower individuals, communities, teams, and organizations to have tough conversations about their contribution to the future that is being built. The following presentation will focus on our approach, the paradigm shifts we have found and engaged, and the larger thematic purposes that drove our discovery to create fertile ground for today's conversation. And as mentioned throughout this presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Designing and planning for an infrastructure of this scale composed of myriad, interdependent, and connected systems is an extremely difficult task due to its sheer complexity. What usually results in the face of this is twofold. There are either far too many choices riddled with uncertainty, or inversely, few choices rooted in blind optimism. Usually it's both at the same time. How do you create a future that aspires beyond the present, but respects and is grounded in reality? Research by designing or design doing. Design allows us to see systems at the ground level, which is a unique perspective that we are not used to thinking about. Objects matter and they have to be understood within the larger system. To get in touch with reality and the objects within it, you have to engage it directly, working with the concepts, people, constraints, contexts, and materials in order to incur rapid, relevant feedback. Through this viscerally engaging process of generative design, we're able to develop tangible and actionable insights as entry points to further exploration. And it's through this very oscillation, this nonlinear experimental process of zooming in and zooming out, that we're able to begin to identify the components of the system and their affordances. We're able to reorganize and recombine them in new ways. And we're able to begin to think at higher orders of magnitude about what purposes they are ultimately serving. To just give credence to what's here on the page on the right, these are some examples of prototypes that we have developed over the last 11 weeks or so. And they essentially served as our portals to learning more and ultimately informed what you see in the report. It's important to note that the grid is but one multi-level infrastructure embedded within a much larger socio-technical force, industrialization. In industry's latest iteration, we are moving from an era of information to an era of intelligence. Emerging capabilities such as AI, machine learning, blockchain, and many others are radically transforming how we perceive our collective and environmental potential in the present and the possibilities they can bear in the future. If history is any indication, the first three waves of industrialization brought immense change to every aspect of life. The fourth wave, which we are quickly accelerating through and entrenched in currently, will be just as, if not more radical. In the face of such wide-scale transformation, the grid is an essential space where these new capabilities will be applied, and the need to explore and define their possible applications and impacts is a necessary task designers are proactively undertaking. What is and will be built into these systems is far more than wires, batteries, and solar panels. Embedded along the way are a series of choices made by humans, all of whom have varying social, cultural, political, and cognitive biases and points of view, which in turn are affected by and affect these emerging computational systems. Designers place central importance on this point, as each choice made will be codified, extended, and amplified to enact influence and change at an unprecedented scale, creating the conditions for holistic discovery, especially as it relates to the harmony of the human, social, environmental, financial, and technical, must be implemented to ensure a thoroughly considered course of action. Therefore, to address the increasing level of complexity, scale, speed, and interconnectedness, organizations must embed the principle of computation itself into teams to enable their collective capacity to act and deepen their relationship with the environment. Methods of organization that prioritize experimentation over ideas, collective knowledge generation, sharing, and integration over ownership, diversity of thought, perspective, and opinion over singular agendas and points of view. Through this process of cross-pollination, asynchronous and synchronous collaboration, organizations are empowered and influenced to think differently and intentionally at scale as a means to achieve large purpose-driven change. And just to provide you a little bit of an example of how we organized ourselves throughout the course, this is a diagram that in an abstract sense represents how we went through the process. So we started with this identifying this large complex space, and I'll just touch on the first round because essentially we went through these rounds of iterations, but we formed these teams to prototype or generative prototyping, and we showed up in class with a show and tell mentality of this is what we learned, this is what it all means, and essentially putting that into the commons for conversation to provoke new insights. And through that, cross-pollination is able to happen. And then we essentially go to the next round. We dump everything and we essentially start over and reshuffle teams. So through this iterative process, we're able to generate far more collective knowledge than we would if we were in segmented teams themselves. So over the past few slides, we have talked about large scale paradigm changes we can expect in terms of computation, in terms of teams. And now I'll hand it over to Mrinali to discuss the possible paradigm shifts as it relates to the microgrid.
Thank you, Zach. So in addition to a shift in our approach, these prototypes, explorations also helped us shape our perspective on 4 key paradigms from the 20th century that we think were essential to envision sustainable futures for the energy infrastructure. The first, in addition to just collecting and reporting and verifying data, technology like smart meters that are embedded with intelligence make sure that this information is both dynamic and transferable and can also adapt to the unique needs of the community in real time. When appliance optimizations systems, we can not only learn and adapt to these emerging circumstances, but also address information transparency and break down both knowledge and expertise barriers for those who can make informed decision making at all levels. With the second, by giving up sole ownership and taking a more self-organized approach, we can move from a decentralized to a more distributed way of collective decision-making. Building micro-generation capabilities gives multiple people both access and the ability to take action, where the role of the utility provider now expands beyond just like maintaining transmission to managing energy credit systems, aggregating data repositories, ensuring homes or even appliance security. Third, when getting your home electrified was once a source of inequity, adding archetypes like energy credit systems, energy labels, storage banks to the very same infrastructure can act as incentivizing mechanisms that bring back both investment and opportunities to the underserved communities. These alternate mental models allow us to think of energy not just as a commodity, but also currency, a generation asset, a shared amenity, or even a public service. Lastly, where everything from selecting a utility provider to the source of energy or the cost we pay and how it's being delivered was not up to us, all we could really do was either turn on or off our appliance. By moving away from this top-down decision-making and providing alternate choices, we are also making the consequences of actions evident so that consumers can now make informed real-time decisions that encourage and make it easy to shift to renewables. Like, for example, choosing to run your laundry at a non-peak hour, say at midnight, for a lesser cost per kilowatt hour as compared to when it would be in a peak hour. With this reframing in mind, we generated a collection of components that carry new affordances, enable new interactions, and drive new impacts. Like the electricity bill here, for example, that was once used to inform the consumer how much money they owed the utility company, thus tracking the movement of financial capital that was exchanged for the energy use. It also carries valuable consumer data that was often used as proof of residence or proof of income. And this could add to the inequity or the burden for those who have either missed payments or have like misplaced records, who can very well get locked out without access to recover. What if the same bill could be a qualifying factor for solar incentives or participating in energy exchange programs? It could open up new ways to then drive the financial capital back into the same community. By digitizing and allowing consumers access to their data in real time, the utility company as a potential data bank can now serve as a community archive to minimize the burden of proof. Through their existing cabling, they can also facilitate the exchange of microenergy that is generated locally within the community, thus allowing them to grow economically as well. Framing through these lenses of equity and others like anti-racism, circular economy, behavioral design allowed us to consider not just the physical and digital assets of the microgrid, but also include choices that we're making, the stakeholders that we're choosing to include, the messages that we're sending, transactions we're enabling, and also the cultures that come together to enable these various kinds of exchanges and the capitals in context. This continuous configuring and reconfiguring of features, affordances, impacts, and goals, therefore, are dependent on the choices we make today for building our new infrastructures. So, with this multitude of choices, it's really important to take a moment and consider that all of these are driven by purpose, and it is this very purpose that guides us into selecting those that create more symbiotic relationships, not just for people, but also between people and the environment. As a class, we identified three themes to ground our explorations and open up our imagination for an alternative future of the microgrid for the 21st century. Diversifying energy sources and shifting to renewable energy production not only ensures that both can continually replenish the benefits of natural resources such as clean air, water, landscape, etc., but also prevents imbalances in the grid due to under or overproduction. Through optimization and automation, we can also reduce the cognitive load so that shifting to renewables can be even more efficient and relaxing for individuals. Next, by advancing energy democracy, we can create more stronger, resilient communities where decision making and power operation is focused at the community level. Whether you install solar panels in your apartment building or pitch in for a wind farm at your local park, through an interconnected energy account, individuals can now decide where and when to operate and manage their energy resources, thus providing several pathways to develop an electrical infrastructure that could increase the community's economic, social, and cultural capital. For growing local economies, incorporating participation from small and mid scale institutions creates a transition scale between the city utility and the individual customers for more localized control and management. This can act as a backup repository to absorb and manage shocks and can protect communities from both physical threats like the hurricane and digital threats like cyber terrorism, thus increasing the overall resiliency and democracy to make this infrastructure truly civic. Finally, all these purpose driven infrastructures are not isolated from entrepreneurship and market forces, but often driven by collaborating with them. And we believe that in addition to policy and behavior changes happening at the other two spectrums, the gaps between these two can be bridged by competition and meritocracy, which not only opens up new business opportunities, but can open up new energy markets as well that break the norms of traditional one way supply. The ways in which we prototyped helped ground us to think about these constraints of materiality, environment, and the market. And we can now walk you through how these apply to each of the themes and how they build on top of each other through a few examples moving ahead. You can find more details about this and others in our report. So what you all see here is a scenario, which is a contextual snapshot that combines various features and shows the key transactions that are enabled when in use. We see that in order to diversify energy resources, buildings can microgenerate electricity for their own usage in a sustainable manner, while taking advantage of their natural sources such as wind or solar, based on their capabilities. If they're not able to do so, they can definitely help manage the production, the exchange, or the storage of energy which is produced by others. We can also prioritize and develop sustainable habits, incentivize use of efficient products and services so that individuals can then make a trackable, measurable impact on the system, thus moving them from being passive energy consumers to more informed and responsible prosumers. Smart technologies can be leveraged to create community level decision making, where a computer can decide how the energy is going to be distributed, where is it going to go from, and prioritize the people from the same community to benefit from the resources. And based on weather reports, an algorithm can decide which buildings should be generating electricity when and for how long, so that we can have the right amount of production without either saturating the grid or having an underproduction of electricity. Moving on to our second theme.
The democratization of energy production and the shift to prosumers opens up new possibilities if we reimagine what interconnected energy accounts could be used for. Redefining energy as an alternative currency would require the type of planning we typically associate with banking. New products and services would be required to not only inform of past usages, but also to help with forecasting and model alternative scenarios. Energy, when approached with an equity lens and viewed as a common resource, could improve access to services such as public transportation or public fridges offered through an open source marketplace. Through innovative public and private partnerships, this marketplace could serve for more than just energy exchange. It could be used for exchanges of services or expertise that could facilitate increased collaboration and autonomy, especially if incentives are focused on elements that increase the overall well-being of the community. All of these would be ways to improve the resiliency of local economies. The new transactions and capabilities that have been revealed also open new possibilities in terms of governance structures. As new institution incentives and services are created, we have the choice of whether to embed certain agendas such as equity in them. One critical emerging transaction we saw was energy education that, if ignored, could continue to increase the current systems and equities. Building out an energy co-op hub whose purpose is to materialize knowledge and provide resources and services to ensure that everyone can gain the skills and access to the elements that would allow them to fully understand and exert their choice would play a key role in improving the lives of residents. Digital community squares could be designed to accelerate the analysis of critical conversations as well as allow for an exploration of new modes of group decision-making that may reduce the burden and barriers of participation, such as allowing individuals to preset policy outcome preferences that would allow for asynchronous communal decision-making. Next, spaces for open experimentation and further exploration around new services, ways to rethink resources, prototyping new interactions, and identifying algorithmic modifications would increase the collective resilience while also providing pathways to innovate public and private partnerships. In summary, for any purpose we explored around the microgrid, new products, services, institutions, policies are revealed. When we explore the microgrid as more than a collection of wires and poles, and instead view it as a civic infrastructure, a collection of places, policies, programs, and practices that connect and shape our daily lives, we see how the choices we make around the energy we use are interwoven with the nature of our economies and our governance and our relationship to each other and our environment. Through our research, we saw 5 key emerging transactions: diversified energy production, informed responsible consumption, community-oriented trading, data-driven public and private collaboration, and energy justice education. Together, they work together to achieve a transition to renewables that could strengthen the resilience and autonomy of local economies while also increasing equitable civic participation. What is most critical and valuable about the work we did is it provides a grounded exploration of the choices we face while releasing us from the paradigms that may no longer serve our current goals. The reconfiguration of transactions open up future scenarios. The choices that face us include how we define energy. This very choice, is it a service, is it a currency, or is it a common good? Each of these mental models of energy can lead us to rethink about market structures and who controls them, the types of private and public collaborations we could incentivize, and even the behaviors we want to teach in kindergarten. We have explored some of these emerging choices in this presentation as well as in further detail in our report. What is clear is that we find ourselves in a critical moment in these debates that will play a role in shaping what tomorrow's communities will look like. And the question remains, what of ourselves will we choose to embed in the infrastructures we create? To further explore this and other questions, Carlos will talk with the panelists to continue the discussion. Please continue adding your comments in the chat and your questions in the Q&A section.
Thank you very much, Zach, Mirali, and Veronica for a great presentation. Now I'm gonna open up for discussion with the panelists. And I'm gonna do a quick introduction of the panelists, but just anticipating in terms of what we want to encourage here as a conversation, I will be asking the panelists for them to react to the ideas, concepts, and provocations from the students. The idea here is for you to look from your own expertise, from your own experience and the work that you do today, and bring additional perspectives of the challenges, opportunities, and different aspects that were not considered by the students, or they consider and they open up new possibilities as they are framing the opportunity space here. So it's the idea of facilitating a reaction from different angles and different sides about the provocation that the students are doing here. So with that, I want to introduce you to Mohammad Shadehpour, who is University Distinguished Professor at IIT, also serving as director of the Robert W. Galvin Center for Electricity Innovation and associate director of the Wagner Institute for Sustainable Energy Research, the WISER Institute at Illinois Tech. Mohammad launched the United States Department of Energy Perfect Power System Project at Illinois Tech in 2009 and converted the East Campus of Illinois Tech into an island-style microgrid and the nation's first functional microgrid. So it'd be great to have his perspective on the microgrid and his reaction to the students' ideas. Second, we have Brandon Shower, is an IIT alum and holds 2 master level degrees from the Institute of Design and the Stewart School of Business. He holds an undergraduate degree in industrial design from the Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech. After leading the Adaptive Path team as CEO and serving as the head of design for Capital One's enterprise products and platforms, he's now currently the senior vice president of RARE, which is a leading behavior change organization in conservation. Brandon is also a member of IIT Institute of Design Board of Advisors. Last, we have Daniel Kushner, is the senior manager of smart grid programs at ComEd, which is a PhD with a PhD in political science. Daniel works on developing and deploying strategic initiatives to impact communities with advanced energy technologies. He leads development and strategic planning for smart city and smart grid initiatives, including electric mobility projects, resilience initiatives, and STEM education to foster transformative impact to help mitigate and adapt to climate change. So we have a great panel here that has very diverse backgrounds and different point of views. And I want to open the 3 of you now to a first reaction to what the students are provoking here, and use your own background and expertise to be able to open up that discussion. So Mohammad, Brandon, and Daniel, any other preference to jump in now?
No, maybe I should start because I was late. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to see the picture of the IIT Microgrid when you started the session. We started back in 2006, actually. So it's been almost 15 years that we have worked on this, and we have spent somewhere close to $70 million so far on this microgrid. Of course, it doesn't mean that every microgrid is going to cost that much money. It very much depends on what your goals are and what your objectives are, and then based on that you can build. Some of the microgrids that we build these days in developing countries cost a few $100s. So you can basically build what your objectives are based on that. So the IIT microgrid, what makes microgrid to be a microgrid is the fact that you can island the system. So in a sense, from a so-called resilience point of view, microgrids play a very significant role. If there is an outage, a local outage, regional outage in this area, we'll be able to island the IIT microgrid and turn the lights on. That's very significant because in the past, when we did not have this microgrid, as long as the regional system was out of power, out of energy, we did not have much of resources. The university roughly about $1 million annually by running it as a microgrid. So that's also very significant. It's about 30% of our total expense for running the electricity grid at the university. We just received another $5 million from the state of Illinois to spend more, innovation, more technologies at the IIT microgrid. So we work very closely with ComEd, of course. ComEd is our local utility, and we are part of the ComEd system. So we don't work in isolation. Whatever we do, I mean, Daniel Kirshner is one of the principals that I've worked with in the past, and we continue to work with him. And it is very important to make sure that whatever we do at IIT is in concert with ComEd. The primary reason is that the entire system has a 60 hertz frequency. Frequency is fixed. So unless we island the system and run it on our own, as long as we are connected to the ComEd grid, we cannot do anything significant that would alter the frequency. So that's why we work very closely with ComEd on everything that we do. But IIT microgrid, basically university is like a park. It's a technology park. You go to different parts of the campus, you can see the batteries, the rooftop solar, you can see the charging station, all the switches. We're going to add more switches, nanogrids that we have at the university. It's a very unique operation. And I'm going to stop here. I'll be more than happy to answer any question that you might have.
Thank you, Mohammed. And by the way, congratulations a lot on the work that you have done. And it was very inspiring to have the students visit and have the tour and learn more about that. It was very inspirational for them to understand the properties of a microgrid so that this can be transformed into those kind of civic infrastructures. The potential that it unleashes is what really inspired the students. Brandon, Daniel?
Hi, great work. I'll have to say I've never built a microgrid. So I come at this more from the perspective of human and participant engagement with your ideas. So Zach, Mernali, Veronica, great work. I think you did an incredible job of being able to put a handle on a very foggy future, put handles on it. So we can all think a little bit about what kind of future do we want to bring about. And it's obvious, like, as a system, the grid is a web of people, policy, infrastructure, environmental issues and needs, and being able to tease that apart is hard, but your ability to say, hey, here are the important choices that we may need to make as a society when we're looking at this, who's going to benefit, who's going to contribute, when and how, has been very helpful to shine a light on it. For me, what came up was towards the end, I think it's Veronica who will spell out the differences of, is the grid a service? Is it a currency, or is it a common good? Like, how people think about it can greatly affect how they interact with it. And even at the beginning, Zach, you raised the point of, hey, electricity, we just don't even think about it. The only time we think about it is when it doesn't work. And to me, that means today we treat it as somewhere between a service and almost a commodity, right? But as you talk through the types of participation people might need in it, diverse groups of people, the idea of particularly currency really elevated in my mind, because we don't think a great deal about electricity today as consumers, as individuals. You know, I think the stat on long-term financial planning, Americans only spend 2 or 3 hours a year thinking about something that's super important, right? And so how do we even elevate the amount of time someone would consider or think about, or how they participate in energy and voice, you know, what they want out of it? And so currency for me was something that could really bring about that model, could bring about greater participation of individuals, as seeing that as a real resource. How do you make it kind of the Bitcoin of your backyard, so to speak? And so questions for me came up was just participation and diversity in that kind of model of currency. How is it not just more for those who already have capital, but how do we extend it to everyone who participates in the grid system as a way that they can participate and raise their own capital, raise their own currencies of energy? So those are things coming to mind for me, but great work.
Yeah, I agree. This work is really interesting, and I'm really glad to be here today, in part because it strikes me that this event itself is an interesting act of translation between multiple fields. I find it entertaining that we're referencing a lot about how most people don't normally think about electricity except for when it doesn't work, and that's of course true for the vast majority of people. But it's entertaining because I work, of course, with people who spend every day thinking about how to make it possible for power to be provided reliably and resiliently and sustainably. And in essence, this is part of, I think, a larger trend where the questions of electricity and electric grid used to be reserved for people who were professional engineers who are focusing on issues like this. But more and more, we're seeing that the electric grid is becoming the site of a larger national and international discussion about how can we enable a world that is as sustainable as it needs to be, that is resilient in the face of emerging challenges, whether they're major weather events like we're seeing caused by climate change, as well as concerns like cybersecurity and all the rest. And what that means is that there needs to be more of this discussion about how can we have a grid that makes it possible to integrate all of the various technologies that communities and residents are thinking about deploying, things like solar panels and electric vehicles, as people seek to live there, as people seek to take advantage of the economic opportunities that come from this, but also to achieve their broader goals in terms of sustainability in the face of emerging challenges. And what that really requires is consideration of making it both accessible to individuals using concepts that come from human-centered design, as well as making sure that it can work with an extremely complex engineering reality, and making possible to integrate these technologies in a way that increases the reliability of the grid and increases the resiliency as well. And so I think that really requires these acts of translation and these acts of conversation across field and across region. And so I think that's really important. I think this is an important step in that direction.
Thanks for the initial comments. I want to build on some of the core elements of the presentation, and going back to what Daniel just said. Mohammed, I'd like to ask a question to you that relates to the concept of one of the key things that we learned from all your presentations and all your explanations is that the microgrid allows us to have more kind of this DIY mentality. I'm not saying that we're going to buy a microgrid in the Home Depot, but I'm saying that people will be able to build and operate a microgrid in a much smaller scale than we think about power plants. And that would require people to start understanding that they can be producers of energy. They can come together, small organizations, small companies, or they can provide a small service that it's part of the microgrid. So we can think about unpacking the microgrid into multiple small services that all come together. So I'd like to, if you could explain a little bit more about the opportunities and the challenges that comes with the microgrid to move from a traditional mass production, mass consumption to a very distributed system of production consumption of energy. So if you could elaborate a little bit more about, from the engineering point of view, what is the new opportunities that are unfolding with the microgrid to be a more distributed system of production consumption of energy?
Well, when electricity was started, as it was pointed out, some 150 years ago, everything was centralized, because those days the notion was the bigger the cheaper, basically. So you build a very large hydro unit, very large nuclear unit, very large coal unit, so the cost per kilowatt hour would drop. And then you build very large transmission system, very extensive system, in order to bring those resources to where people live, because you couldn't build a very large hydro unit in the middle of Chicago. So it was very far from the city, or a nuclear unit. And then they built these transmission facilities to bring the power to, let's say, where individuals live. What changed was the notion of this distributed generation. In a sense, once we started developing renewable energy, rooftop solar, small wind units, we realized that these units don't have to be very far from where people live. So you can put the solar on the roof of your house, or a wind unit very close to where you live, or put a battery in the basement of your house, and then start generating electricity and supply your load. So that's where this notion of microgrid and distributed generation, distributed utility started. What microgrid does, it brings a collection of consumers together, in a sense that if everybody puts a solar on the roof of their houses, or the battery in the basement of their houses, it's going to be very difficult for a utility company, but still exist, to manage all of those, because I can basically run my battery whenever I want, or I can use my solar whenever I'm interested. So since that's not under the control of the utility, it makes the basically operation of the grid that has to remain synchronized at 60 hertz very difficult. Microgrids sort of aggregates these loads in a neighborhood. In the case of our system is IIT. In the case of Brownsville, would be a neighborhood near IIT, so that you can sort of localize these controls, and then that control system will work with, let's say, local utility company. And what these distributed generation does is that because we use resources that are sort of free to us, like we don't, other than buying these solar units, we don't spend any money to generate electricity. Or same thing with a wind unit, you buy a wind unit, but there is no fuel usage by the wind unit. So the cost per kilowatt hour drops dramatically. Not only that, let me put it this way, the problem with the solar and the wind and all the other renewable energy is that they are very sort of dependent on the nature. So solar power is generated as long as sun is shining, or the wind power is generated as long as wind is generating or is generated. So in order to be able to manage that, we always use battery storage along with these units. So then the question is, how do we coordinate solar and the wind and the batteries? And not only that, as it was pointed out in one of the presentations, we are moving to the point that we see a lot more demand response. So new technologies in the form of IT and IoTs and all of that are coming to the usage, to the point that a lot of appliances that you're buying these days come with the Wi-Fi connections. These are devices that you can control remotely. So basically, if I know the real-time price of electricity, and I know that the price is expensive, let's say at night, I can run my dishwasher after midnight and save quite a bit, because after midnight, the price of electricity is much cheaper. So then you, from one side, you've got solar and the wind and the batteries. From the other side, you've got the customer participation that allows you to use these home appliances whenever you feel and whenever you think it's more economical. So the coordination of all of these is a very critical operation and a decision that makes the microgrid basically viable. Now, of course, microgrid, if you build a microgrid, you can save quite a bit because the system is bigger and you can do a lot more like at IIT. However, as Professor pointed out, you can also build a microgrid at home. We can basically convert your home to a small microgrid by putting solar on the roof of your house, by putting a battery in the basement of your house and wire that, which is sort of very easy. And also use your appliances to the extent that you can reduce the cost of utilizing electricity and also enhance the operation of the entire grid, not only your house. Because what will happen is that when we all turn on our dishwashers or appliances at night, it forces the utility company to generate a lot more electricity at night. And then what it does is that it makes the grid a lot more congested. It adds a lot more stress to the grid. It makes it a lot more expensive to operate it, and it makes it a lot more difficult from a reliability point of view to operate that. It's the same thing with our highways. You know, when everybody goes home at the same time, or when everybody goes to work at the same time, highways get congested. We have congestion, we have traffic hours, we have congestion in the morning, we have congestion at night. But then you look at the same highway, 2 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody on the road. It means that we spent millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to build these highways, regional highways, and then at night nobody is using them. So if somehow we can shift non-essential cars to use a highway after midnight, maybe these traffic will not be as bad as it is, let's say 8 o'clock in the morning. And also maybe our government wouldn't have to build so many highways as they build now as population goes up. It's the same thing with the electricity grid. As we build these technologies that allows us to control our appliances and also generate electricity locally, it allows utilities not to build such a complex system, and also allows utilities to manage the system much more comprehensively in case there's a stress. I mean, not very long ago, we had that chaotic situation in the state of Texas. Luckily, there was no mortality, but there were billions of dollars of loss. And people are going through all those issues to manage the system. If we did have a distributed system, if we had a better handle of this system, probably the system would have been much safer, and then the damages and losses would not have been so costly.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on that, on those comments, and ask Daniel to comment a little bit the role of those utility companies. So based on what Mohammed was talking about, we could imagine that the role and the opportunities of a business, especially the business opportunities of those utility companies, will also shift. They can be a threat to those utility companies. So think about like when mainframes shifted into the personal computer. I don't know if the analogy here is adequate for thinking about the power plants and the microgrid. But I would like you to comment from, for example, ComEd or a utility company. How are you seeing the shifts that are going on, and where those utility companies are thinking about positioning themselves? Are they fighting against, or they are trying to build on that? They see their role changing. They see that as growing opportunities for their business. So what is the position of the companies, both in terms of serving the customers as well as thinking as a company that has to satisfy the shareholders?
Yeah, we certainly don't see this as a threat at all. Electric utilities like ComEd no longer own generation, which means we're only responsible for the transmission and distribution of electricity. And so in essence, we're sort of a neutral arbiter in terms of who wants to generate electricity and how. So what this really is the shift is that before we were really transmitting electricity from large centralized generations, which were disproportionately across the United States, there were disproportionately carbon emitting power plants. In Illinois, we've had the fortune of having a lot of nuclear generation, which has obviously does not produce carbon. But now we're seeing a shift towards to what Professor Teixeira was mentioning earlier, towards more distributed generation like solar panels. And that's a really exciting opportunity for electric utilities because what it means is that it increases the value proposition of electricity, that it helps show that electricity is becoming part of the solution in terms of mitigating climate change. And that really requires, and that makes it obviously much more valuable from not just a economic perspective, but also societal perspective. And in a larger sense, what we're starting to see is that microgrids, microgrids, we're actually excited by microgrids in addition to the IIT microgrid that ComEd has been involved with. ComEd is also working with Professor Shahidapur on the deployment of another microgrid in Bronzeville, which is providing additional resiliency to a portion of the neighborhood there, as well as integrating a significant amount of DER, distributed energy resources, including solar. But really, we see microgrids as part of a larger solution, where our goal is really to enable distributed generation, to enable solar PV, to enable electric vehicles of all our customers across our service territory. And for us, the really exciting thing about the work that we're doing with IIT in both the microgrid that serves IIT as well as the Bronzeville microgrid is the technologies that we're developing there and what we're learning there on how to integrate renewable generation across the system. We're learning more about how we can have energy storage speak to solar panels with the support of distributed control capabilities and advanced smart inverter capabilities to allow solar PV to act as if it's a controllable resource. And what we're seeing there is that these technologies are making it easier for us to integrate the various forms of renewable generation that customers are providing. And we're seeing that this is actually showing more of the value that electric utilities can provide, that really, if we're going to, in the long term, it's kind of unlikely that you're ever going to see customers relying simply on the generation that's produced on their homes because of just how much storage you would have to have for the solar, considering things like solar panels, unfortunately, only produce power for a certain number of hours per day. And the really exciting possibilities come when you can get the benefits from the solar while also interconnecting it with other forms of renewable generation across the region. When you can combine the benefits that come from solar on your home with the solar that might come from a few hours away, where the sun might still be shining, along with wind generation, as well as other forms of zero carbon generation like nuclear power. And that really requires the conjunction of both the contributions of customers, contributions of behind the meter microgrids like we're seeing in IIT, community microgrids like we're seeing in Chicago, but also a larger grid that puts all these pieces together. And that really is a very complicated technical question. And it's something that power engineers are spending their lives thinking about. How can we make these technologies work in order to meet the broader goals of mitigating the effects of climate change?
Thanks, Daniel. And I want to link that with Brandon. Brandon, you have worked on Capital One, which is basically a bank, but also a financial institution. And you brought the concept of human-centered design as a central piece of their work. And that requires people to think about less about banking and more about financial mindset and financial literacy and how to manage their finances rather than just thinking about banking. So and now you are in a nonprofit organization that is talking about behavior change and very focused on the area of sustainability. So I'm wondering the parallels that you are bringing from your previous experience at Capital One and how the presentation of the students here talking about energy as a capital, as something that will require behavior change at the individual level, but also at the community level, because they're going to be thinking as producers, as consumers, And Mohammed was also talking about the whole concept that you might start thinking about how you manage your appliance at home in completely different ways. So there's all these different levels from the individual into the community, into entire populations, that this can be unleashed by the new technologies and the new developments. So I was curious, how would you address and how would you think from a human-centered design as well as from a behavior design point of view, the changes that are unfolding in the energy sector?
Yeah, I think the biggest contrasts are things like the great complexity of what's going on actually in the system, all the choices that could be made, all the alternatives available to you, versus how little people think today about their energy and power. I think sometimes we hope, Homo economicus will happen and people will act very rational all the time. But in fact, I know from finance to what I'm working on these days, people do not behave that way, right? They don't always do the thing that is most efficient, most economical. They do the things that are habit, that are cultural, that are fulfilling their emotional needs. And so I think as we look at these types of solutions, we have to think through, really from a more human-centered design lens, how do people really behave? What do they really end up changing based on? And I think economics can be one strong lever. Providing them with information insight can be another strong lever, but these tend to be the ones we always lean upon to try to help people change is change policy, change economics, and give people the information. But I think we also need to look at the other things. For example, social levers, like, is it even observable that you can see someone else doing some of these things, either how they're engaging with their appliances at home, or one of the great things about solar or community solar is it's visible, it's out there and observable and out there in the community. The greatest predictor actually of will you in the US adopt solar is not your economic situation or anything, it's whether your neighbor has solar. Because suddenly there's this influence of like, I see it, I see how it's working, I know someone to talk to, and they think it's important. And maybe I should think it's important too. So really being able to look at some of these other levers. Another one is just choice architecture. Because there's such a myriad of solutions, how can we really simplify the number of choices for your average consumer of like, hey, you know what, for you, most likely community solar is the right way to go, and maybe a monthly average billing to flatten out your bill over the year. That seems to be the best. That's what we'll recommend, or that's what we'll create as a default for you, rather than trying to say, first, let me explain the entire grid. And then let me show you all your many, many choices. We know from choice architecture, the more choices you present someone with, the more they will just turn off and go away and never make a choice. So I think there's a lot of intersections between how we know humans actually behave to what can help them navigate the emerging grid infrastructure that we're hearing articulated here today.
Great. Hey, Carlos, do you mind if I hop in just really quick to add on to that?
I was going to do exactly that, Zach.
Cool.
I just want to make a comment that I moved Jordan and Lynn into panelists. They were as an attendant, and I will suggest if they want to come on camera, on video, and also unmute to make a question. But as you prepare, I don't want to put you on the spot immediately, but I'd like to invite you to be able to join the conversation here. But before we do that, and to give time to Jordan and Lynn just to set up if they want, I was going to exactly do that, Zach. I want the three of you, Veronica, Mirali, and Zach, to react a little bit to the comments that they had here, because you guys have worked so hard on and so expensive on so many of those ideas, trying to, for example, the choice architecture and understanding the impact that the technology can have on the business of in the industry, that you guys will consider several of those ideas. And the presentation is always short. We cannot go through all the details. So I want to give more space here for the three of you to jump with comments, examples, and engage in the conversation with the panelists. Zach?
Yeah, okay. There is I feel like a lot here that might require coffee or a meetup at another time. So a few things come up. I thought that was interesting, Brandon, how you said like the Bitcoin of the backyard. And as we started to think about this big shift essentially from more of a centralized way of doing things, which, you know, at the time that got us to where it got us. It had its implications, it's had its use. But as we've seen, there's this wider, massive trend moving towards decentralization and distribution. We're all a part of it as far as social media, computer networks, and we can all kind of see in the future of, you know, the mental model that's emerging and being embedded into everything here. And I thought that was kind of the most interesting paradigm shift for me, was this idea one of micro generation. So sure, we can use the home as a place, as an enterprise and as a way to generate and use resources, but then also potentially embedding that energy into not only the community, but maybe like divvy bikes. Can we even think smaller about how energy is generated and perhaps how it is leveraged? So sorry, my mind's going all over the place. So bringing that to the idea of like the local bank, the Bitcoin in the backyard, you have this shop that's located in the community. I'm wondering how you all think relationships will change in light of this. So we start to see, we have a collective resource reservoir in a sense. But instead of just using electricity, it's something that we can leverage, it's something that we can potentially manipulate, and it's something that we can actually attribute to other things outside of itself, given the potential value of it. So I'm curious, as within this paradigm shift, I mean, if you could kind of just riff on that a little bit of what you think is embedded in that and how that might kind of change our communities at the local level.
You know, when we talk about the paradigm shift, a lot of people think about solar panels and batteries and all that, but I personally believe, and I think you refer to that, I think the most important or the most immediate thing that we're going to see is the customer participation in the form of demand response. In a sense, using the real-time price of electricity, we learn when to use our appliances rather than using all of them at once. And in particular, now the technologies are changing, as I was pointing out, to the extent that you can shift the time of usage. And you don't have to stay up, let's say 2 o'clock in the morning to turn on your dishwasher. The technology is set up to the extent that it can look for the cheapest hour within the 24 hours, and depending on your choice, when you want these things to be done, and get it done, and then make it ready by the time you get up or you need to use them. So I think that notion of customer participation and how we manage the load to the extent that we can help the utilities get rid of this sort of a hump and the stress that exists in this grid at the peak hours is going to be the most immediate. Now, of course, the use of solar panels and the wind and geothermal and the batteries and all that comes along with that in the form of distributed systems. But again, I think the most immediate one is the use of digital technology in order to educate the customers to use their appliances more wisely and not to use them at the same time. You know, we've had several grants and funded projects at IIT on the subject of customer education. Because a lot of times, you know, customers either don't care at this time or don't know what it means, what's the use of these technologies. So being able to work with customers and educate them as to how they can use this technology is going to be the most immediate task. A lot of people are going to be interested in the future for different reasons. Some people would like to maybe save some money. Of course, the saving may not be significant, but there are people, let's say in California, talking about regional models, who may be more interested in cleaner environment. They want to use technologies that do not pollute the air as much as they do. There are other parts of the country, perhaps in Texas or Eastern Seaboard, where we have a lot of outages, are more interested in the continuation of electricity. They're not interested in seeing hospitals losing power, elevators losing power. So for those people, maybe cleaning the environment may not be the most immediate issue, but making sure that the continuity and the reliability of the grid is maintained is the objective. So whatever it is, working with customers to sustain those goals, being able to maintain them, being able to implement them, is going to be the most immediate task. Now, of course, utilities are going to play very, very significant role. That's something that we have to keep in mind. Now, the question was raised earlier that whether these technologies are going to reduce the revenues that utilities are interested. I don't think that's going to be the case. Basically, these technologies are bringing new businesses, and maybe the utility business in the future is going to be a different business, but the utility is going to be the utility. It's the same thing with the wireless telephone industry. You know, where very few of us are using landlines anymore. And we are very happy with our cell phones because we can send data, we can send photos, we can chat with people and all that. But it's a different business for AT&T. AT&T is still around. A lot of new companies came around, but it's a different business, a different type of basically approaching the business. And I think that's what we're going to see in the utility industry as well in the future, where they're going to look for different ways of serving the customers while maintaining their business.
Thank you for the discussion. And I just want to highlight again that one of the main purpose of the course was exactly to look at all those changes and disruptions and see how design and the expertise that comes with the design process and the professionals in the field, that they could approach a problem like that. So exactly understanding the disruptions and the new opportunities and new possibilities, and imagine what we could do with that. So if you look at the report, you're going to see several concepts and several ideas of products and services. So new infrastructures that would enable this kind of future to unfold. That's the exploration that the students were having there. I would like to introduce here Lynn. So Lynn, if you could introduce yourself very briefly and also jump into the conversation with a question. I don't know if you want to have the question to the student, to the panelists. Welcome, and you have been very vocal on the chat with questions. So I'm giving you the opportunity here to jump into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I'm very honored to be promoted to panelist here. So I have to get myself some tea to get this going. Yeah, I've been involved with municipalization of the local electric supply in Boulder for the past 10 years. And as you might have read in my chat, we had one of our collaborators turn against us after he joined the planning board and become mayor, actually, in Boulder during this period of time. So there's a huge pressure, and he was one of our main people. And we've been working on this 10 years. So it was a very big deal when they chose Xcel Energy, and the mayor and this other business community member that was on council collaborated with them to get us off of the franchise with a ballot measure this last November, because of course it was a Trump year. So it's the forces that be are very big. And many in our group have actually worked for public banking, which was brought up during today also, and microcurrencies and such. So the way, and now with the virus this last year, it just seems like we have a whole different paradigm to work in. And we're learning, and we need agility. And the way we get agility is through independence of the utility system. I brought up the Texas freeze, and I haven't followed closely, but I know some rural communities have been stuck with huge bills, and rural communities throughout the United States, in Colorado, not just Texas. So the national grid is a situation here too. So the whole concept of microgrids I've been fascinated with from the start. One of the colleagues in our group, Tim Sheckley, is a PhD in telecom and is very involved in transactive energy. And I tried to reach him on the phone when you promoted me to panelist to get him on, because he's really so more qualified than myself. I'm just a measly ultrasound technologist that took up this field. And actually, my daughter has given a talk with IIT Adrian Siegel. She's an environmental artist. So I was really pleased when this microgrid talk came up. But the fact that so many jobs can be created from this, but who is going to be in control of the jobs? That's the question. And are we going to have the same corporate paradigm, which is breaking down all over the world with, the choice between war and Black Lives Matter and, and more efficient ways of operating in our communities and our localities. So that's kind of what I was coming into the conversation for. And yeah.
I really appreciate those comments. I'd like to ask Veronica and Mirali if you could jump a little bit and react to Lynn's comments. I think the issue of equity was something that you guys worked so vividly in the whole project. Always making the question of who is that for, who is going to benefit, what are the privilege that is embedded in the current system, and how can we make sure that those privilege, those bias, those discriminations are not carried over into the new systems. And so you guys worked a lot on that. Can you navigate us into some examples of kind of concepts and strategies that you guys came up that allows us to think about the future different from the past?
So I think the first thing is you do have to recognize who has been sort of paying the burden and understand that racism and oppressive structures have long played a role in the energy infrastructure. And you have to be conscious of that, and you have to recognize that these are infrastructures that have extracted the capital and also have left with residents paying much higher electricity bills. I think the conversation once mentioned about sort of, we need to educate consumers about when to use their appliances. We talked about retrofitting solar panels, and the question is who pays for that, and who do we prioritize to help with that implementation. And also the idea of choices assumes that people have access to those choices, and they may not. Saying run your laundry at night assumes that you can do that there's somebody there. The laundry machines we have today are created based on somebody staying at home and being able to monitor it and taking it out, taking a load out and putting it into a dryer. Those have consequences. And I think really exploring the embedded choices and values in everything we create and what is a society that we imply behind that is intrinsic. And there is a question that we talk about, who gets the money from all this increased generation? It's not just the retrofitting, but who manages the money and who runs the capital, and how do we envision capital? So for example, there's the adding solar panels and adding that income to a house could also increase land value. But that also, if not managed correctly, could increase gentrification. So there's all these interplays, and I think it's a lot of what we said is, how do we use the various systems, such as, for example, can solar panels now be linked to the loan amounts in order to make owning a house more accessible for those that were part of predatory mortgage systems? How can that be reworked? So that's some of the things that we explored. Mrinali?
I think you beautifully put a point to that. And just to reiterate, I think it's important to remember that all of these, like choices that we're making are only driven by the values that we embed in it. And even to your point about, how you said that you need agility in the system, like even the agile framework, as we talk about it, is not independent of the goals that it's aiming to achieve. Like these things have to be like driven by agendas and purposes, and they cannot, like, you cannot put the burden of picking these out on an individual, or I mean it's not like solely on the individual or on the utility or the corporates. And I think to that point, it's important to then like bring in those connections or intermediaries of like who are these new people who are creating jobs. So which is why they what we mentioned with the small to mid-scale entrepreneurs, or like even your grocery stores, or like local CVS can help serve to bridge this gap between the two scales, so that it's also driven by purpose, but accessible to everyone.
So I'm looking at time, and I just want to be fair with everybody for the time that I asked everybody to participate. We're going to get to the closure. I would like to give the opportunity for Brandon, Daniel, and Mohammed to make a final comment. If you can be brief in just a closing remark, like a minute or less, just to a takeaway for all the audience and also for the students from this conversation. What is the main takeaway and observation that you'd like to leave for today?
Well, let me point out that I think the future is going to be very different. One thing that's critical, and I think that's very important for the students in the Institute of Design, is to understand that embedding these new technologies over the old technology is a very false notion as to how we view the future. The same way that we did that in the case of a wireless telephone industry. When we came up with this new wireless technology, we did not add that to the landline. Wireless telephone industry is a completely different technology. It has nothing to do. It's in parallel with the landline, but we did not add that to the existing technology. It's going to be the same thing. When, just to answer to the point that the previous speaker made, Veronica made, we are not going to look into old dishwashers or washing machines and all of that. Everything is going to be a brand new, I mean, that's the way it should be. Otherwise, from economic point of view, from a social point of view, from political point of view, it's not going to work. So we have to basically get out of the box, design a system that from a customer's point of view, from operations, from planning, from the utilization, it's a completely different system. One thing that's important is that when these wireless telephone system was going to be started, I remember that, I mentioned the name AT&T. AT&T, which had the monopoly on the telephone system in the United States at the time, they raised this issue that why do we need this wireless technology? The landline is fine, it's working, everybody has a telephone on the desk and everybody is happy. Why do we have to spend all this money and go to a wireless system and get rid of the landline? And look where we are now. I mean, you can basically take your phone from wherever you're sitting and call anybody anywhere in the world these days. That's something that you couldn't even imagine when you had the landline system. So it's a completely different system. It's a completely different design, and it's going to be a much, much brighter future as far as I see it.
And the more change we're going to see, the more design we're going to need. Daniel?
I think what's really exciting about this topic is the link between the local and the global. I'm so sorry. The link between the local and the global. Part of what we're doing is thinking about how, in order to integrate the technologies that allows communities to meet their particular goals. That's including deploying solar panels on their homes. It includes electrification. It includes efforts in order to in making sure those technologies are meeting each of the particular needs, because we recognize that different communities have different sets of needs. That the air quality challenges that are especially intense in portions of Chicago, areas that have traditionally been disinvested in, are having outsized public health impacts that are especially explicit here. And so making sure that there are the investments in order to meet these local needs in order to help improve public health in those areas is crucial. But simultaneously, there is a global issue. And the global issue is both things like climate change, but also regional ones. We're mentioning Texas earlier, and Texas is really a reminder of not the problem of having too large of a grid. It's a problem when a grid is disconnected from the rest of the grid. The way the electric grid in the United States is designed is that there are essentially three portions. There's the East, there's the West, and then there's Texas. And because Texas isolated itself from the broader grid, it left itself vulnerable to exactly this. And what happened in that case is we're seeing those incredibly high expenses that are faced by lots of communities in lots of areas. What happens when they aren't connected to everybody else? And what we really need here is a conversation that's broader, across the United States, as we're now in national discussion about what are the technologies that are needed in order to build the infrastructure that can help us mitigate climate change, a conversation that's broader in terms of across discipline, a conversation that includes representatives of every group, that considers all of the particular needs of each area, and makes sure not to be too isolated and not to focus on some of the individual things. And we need to consider both of them at the same time. And in essence, maybe that's the most interesting thing about an entire concept, the image of a grid, that it's really about connecting individuals with something much larger. And that keeping in mind both of those aspects of both at every point is an essential to making sure that we can meet our collective goals.
Wonderful, great comment. And one of the things that I've been working a lot with the students is for them to move beyond the notion of just designing the products and service and human center, understanding that those things, they belong to a system. They are part of a system. They are agents with agency in a much larger system. Why we cannot design the whole system, but we can design the infrastructures that enable those systems to change. So this was a major task for the students, and I'm really glad that you are talking about the different levels from the local to the global. Brandon, last word.
Sure. As Dr. Shahidapur mentioned earlier, this is like that shift from land-based to cellular mobile-based. And what we saw in that purposefully or just happenstance was that we decreased the digital divide. The people who didn't have computers got mobile phones and they were able to get access through that. I think there's still the same opportunity here of we can benefit a greater number of people, have a greater number of people participate, and I applaud the level of thinking that went into that around creating inclusion. As Dr. Kushner said, we really want to have that conversation to bring kind of the human-centered and while understanding the system, zoomed out system view, so that we're not just playing with parameters, but really the deeper things that bring about the greater, brighter changes that we want to bring about. So great work, everyone.
So thank you, everyone. We get to the end of our event here. congratulations the whole class and all the students. This video will be saved and put on our website and our YouTube channel, and for people to access. And you can download also the report from the link in the chat. And feel free to engage back with us and have further conversations. This is the project that we developed this year. It was focused on energy. Just reminding that last year was on food and the previous years was on housing. So we're going to continue with a series of topics, all exploring this notion of infrastructure in large-scale transformation. So thank you very much. Congratulations to the students, and we're going to end the event now. Thank you.
I hope you can have many more on microgrid.
Thank you, everyone.